I've been reflecting a lot after this conversation, especially when it comes to how I speak with politicians and what politicians I invite onto the show. So, for context, this previous Thursday, was August 13th, news broke that the Progressive Conservatives had sent spies to follow Bonnie Crombie to Jamaica while she was on vacation. I wanted to get a member of the Liberal caucus onto the show to discuss that, and they put me in touch with Stephanie Smyth, who is their ethics and integrity critic. Near the end, I thought, I only have 15 minutes with her, but I've got her on the show. I might as well ask her about, municipal issues, as well as why should people support the Liberals over the NDP. Just always want to make sure people have the chance to make their argument for their own party. I didn't realize that Stephanie was a Brad Bradford supporter. I think I would have handled asking her that question differently had I known that going in. That's on me. Yesterday, Friday, August 14th, the courts ruled that Doug Ford does in fact have the right to pull out Bloor bike lanes. This conversation is still fairly relevant, even though that the context has changed a bit. What you're about to listen to is a guy trying to do two things. One, keep the show going and have a conversation with my lovely guests, Dan Seljak and Aya Jabber, while also having a very nuanced internal experience of, what is my place in this world and in the content that I create? What is the line between me sharing my true perspective and when do I need to be more diplomatic with the people that I speak to? I really encourage you to keep listening through the rest of this episode to hear my emotional evolution. I should always say, the views that I state in this episode are the views of me alone and should not be considered endorsed or not endorsed by either of my guests, me and me alone. I think I might never be able to have a member of the OLP caucus on the show ever again after this episode. And maybe that's okay. Because I think that, anyways, listen to the episode and make up your mind. So what you're about to hear is just the last little chunk of me talking with Stephanie Smyth, where I ask her why she thinks people should support the OLP. And I ask her for her thoughts on the municipal election. She chooses to take that moment to endorse Brad Bradford. And then you hear me slowly have a breakdown as I think about how that conversation now. And can I ask, Stephanie, I'd say my audience tends to be split sort of 50-50 between the Liberal Party of Ontario and the NDP. To you, why do you think that the Liberals ought to be the first choice for someone who's maybe on the left of the aisle in Ontario right now compared to the NDP?
Well, I just love how pragmatic Liberals are. I think we understand and we try to lift through economy. We've got to build our economy up, and that way we create jobs. Creating jobs creates opportunity, and that lifts people out of being on the margins. So I think we have that approach that is, we have strong leadership when it comes to the economy in our caucus with Stephanie Bowman, who also is running for leader, I might add, and Lee's approach and Lee's understanding of healthcare. People have been there on the front lines. So I really love that the Liberals understand the holistic approach to building this province back up again. And that's why I believe we are the better choice by far going forward to lead this province again.
Can I ask you, and feel free to tell me no, especially I didn't warn you about this. Do you have any perspectives when it comes to the municipal race so far? Are there any issues you wish were being discussed that you haven't noticed being discussed quite yet?
You know what? I am watching it very closely. I support Brad Bradford. I have since 2023, when I volunteered on his campaign in the media side, right, helping him get some media coverage. And look, he learned a lot during that race. There are 80 contestants in the race for leader. I think Brad understands when I talk to him about my support He understands what's happening with tenants in my riding. In Toronto St. Paul's, we have 70%, 60 to 70% of the people are renters, and many of those are living on the margins. He understands tenants' rights, and that's where I'm grateful that he does. I think he has also a pragmatic approach to what's happening in the city right now and all kinds of new, fresh ideas that are coming up. And I look forward to watching him continue to campaign, until we have October 26th is the election. So I'm excited about that. I think it's time that we give Brad a chance in the mayor's office, and I'm really thrilled to support him. And I think he means well in all he is doing going forward. And I think that, again, we'll watch the platform roll out and more ideas coming forward.
Well, Stephanie, I hope we have a chance to have a longer conversation about all those issues sometime. But I really appreciate you making the time today and for coming on to the show. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
It was really nice to be here. Thanks so much for asking me. Have a great night. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Take care. Bye-bye. And thank you very much for MPP Stephanie Smyth for joining the show. I hope she doesn't listen to the rest of this episode, especially when we start talking about bike lanes. But
I was very well behaved. I'm just going to say, but I'll leave that for later in the episode.
I think that was we can maybe just have a conversation about that conversation now, perhaps. It is always an interesting thing when I'm now talking to because it is that split between the provincial and the municipal just issues, and I'm always surprised, I suppose, when they support. And it's a funny thing with Brad and the Liberal Party, because especially, and we can segue a bit into the bike lane conversation here, because I view that Bloor, and if we had more time, maybe I would have pressed her on this a little bit more. The ripping out of the Bloor West bike lanes, which I think has kind of been the buzziest issue on municipal politics today, feels like such an appeal to the typical progressive conservative voter. That has been something that Doug Ford's progressive conservatives have been trying to achieve since, I guess, 2024 is when they first passed that law to try to rip out bike lanes. So I guess I view there to be a little bit of a strange cognitive dissonance for an Ontario Liberal to be supporting Brad Bradford in that regard, because it feels like, in a way, they're going along with a bit of Doug Ford's vision for Ontario. Dan, do you have any initial reaction to that conversation we had with Stephanie whatsoever?
I mean, she's been a supporter of Brad for a while. Noted that she had volunteered in his campaign last time, and I think, to watch a candidate go from getting just below 2% of the vote to now being the second choice in most of the polls right now is probably very exciting. And I could see, kind of seeing it as the realization of an investment in someone's talent and growth potential.
We talk about Oppo research. If Stephanie were to finish this call and then go immediately to my Instagram page, she would see 5 reels where I'm just calling Brad Bradford a deceitful politician. So I do worry sometimes about the dynamic there.
I just think, to your point though about this idea that there are no parties in municipal politics, supposedly, and despite that, things tend to fall on pretty sharp party lines with some weird gradients of kind of right-leaning liberals sometimes falling towards a more conservative candidate, and then sometimes left-leaning liberals falling towards a more NDP candidate, and whatever kind of happens in between. And then there's odd types of candidates who kind of play hopscotch with that whole line and grab people from all over the place. Mamalidi comes to mind as a former NDP person who went kind of hard right. For the most part, you can kind of tell where people are going to go. And I think, honestly, I don't know if you've heard this idea of America A, America B, but it's something I think a lot about as someone who talks about urbanism. But there is a conservative urban population, and then there's a conservative suburban population, and then there is a more progressive urban population and a more progressive suburban population. And often things like bike lanes actually don't really fall on a right wing, left wing axis so much as on, that kind of more of a quadrant. And so I think an interesting thing about Bradford and the support that he sees from some more kind of progressive or liberal supporters is, this idea not of a harsh left-right spectrum, but something else, more of like a radar graph, maybe. And I think this is an expression of that. So I'm just kind of spitballing why that might happen, but I do think that there is kind of this idea of like,
I think I was listening to that and I was thinking, is this going to be the last time a member of Ontario Liberal Caucus ever comes on this show, perhaps? Because they're not going to be listening to this conversation and, and thinking, wow, because I don't know. Do you have any perspective when it comes to specifically just the having an MPP on the show or her reaction to the questions whatsoever?
I think having an MPP on the show is absolutely important. And I think that cognitive dissonance that we were talking about in that comparative factor when it comes to the municipal election versus, any talk of a provincial election or who's in power is exactly what community members need and want to hear. And for me, what it was interesting to hear was she's very passionate, and it comes across in the way that she speaks. And it is quite interesting. I'm not sure. Maybe she already saw your Instagram prior to joining the show.
I would say because I'm like very messy. You could say in terms of like public criticism of Brad Bradford, I'm like pretty close to the top right now. In a way that I think is maybe more toxic than I ought to be on an ongoing basis. So I am just very curious about how that interaction is going to be perceived by the Ontario Liberals going forward. I don't think so. I think that, I don't know, because I think that is a level of like social media engagement that I don't think like, someone... Like, I don't think that like Stephanie Smyth is probably like looking through my Instagram much before hopping on a show. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she knew that and just was like, yeah, whatever. We're talking about the issues of the day. But yeah, I don't know. Okay, bike lanes. Dan,
yes,
your initial reaction when you heard that Brad Bradford was planning on... So he put out a press release saying that if elected mayor, he's going to rip out the Bloor West bike lanes. What was your initial reaction to that?
Unsurprised. I mean, look, like, I'm not going to get out my red string and put this on the wall with a bunch of like faces and names, but a lot of the issues that Bradford has taken on this election mirror very closely things that have been thorns in Chow's side up till now. So Balance on Bloor was kind of a group of individuals who wanted these bike lanes out in that area that were, part of what I have historically called Crank Voltron, which is kind of the group united by Integrity TO that had a bunch of qualms with what Chow has been doing and have, united on everything from shelters to bus lanes to bike lanes, lots of lanes, lots of things that they think are wrong in their specific neighborhood. And I see all of that kind of initial upset as kind of a trial for his mayoral run. And when they had their first kind of press conference at Nathan Phillips Square, Bradford was scheduled to be, a keynote or something. I don't know, but he didn't show up for whatever reason. And it's still not really clear why he didn't show up, whether that was a rebuke or if that was like him stepping away from their endorsement, but he clearly has embraced a lot of their causes now in his campaign for mayor. So it didn't surprise me at all. It basically has already been audience tested. It already has advocacy groups in favor for it, and there's going to be a very receptive audience to what he had to say there, just as there is going to be a bunch of people who feel, betrayed that former cycling champion Brad Bradford is now ripping out bike lanes. So, I would say unsurprised is the emotion I felt. It was inevitable.
What's been your read on the maybe the municipal election broadly and then the transportation issue specifically?
I would say that the main concern that we've been hearing, or one of the main concerns that we've been hearing from community members specifically, is the costs of the removal and the fact that it was such a huge cost to implement them to begin with. So I can say as to what the community has been saying to us, and in recent years, it is a huge upset for a lot of people, both from a safety aspect, but also from an investment aspect.
Brad, do you think, Dan, do you think Brad is effective right now? Do you think
I know,
Well,
I know we both don't have hair, but like, come on, man, you can't do that.
You do have hair, Dan. It's just, below your eyebrows. Do you think that this has been an effective strategy? Like, if you're looking at Brad's campaign right now, what's your confidence interval on his success?
He doesn't have much else to go on. Like, I think something, not when I think about like what I would try to do if I were Brad to win. Like, I think a challenge that he has is Chow has incredibly well invested positions. She's made a huge investment in the position she's made. First off, because she's actually been enacting things as mayor, but also because she has a track record that is decades and decades long. And so to differentiate himself, he doesn't really have any choice but to kind of go the opposite way. I mean, I kind of wish sometimes he would present an even more full or more enriched version of some of the things that she is suggesting, and I think he could kind of try and outflank her from like a pragmatic, productive kind of way instead of like a oppositional way, but whatever. And so he has to do that. And then, kind of more insider baseball when you hear about like the fact that John Tory's team is not super fond of him and that he's alienated certain other kind of key politicos, like, he has nothing to do but double down at this point. Like, he doesn't have a way forwards when you've closed every door and there's just one you have to keep walking through over and over and over. I guess you kind of just have to do it and see how it plays out with the electorate afterwards. It is hard often for me to put myself in his position and be like, what are his two options to do here, when he has like at times with his past decisions kind of closed the door and kind of only has the one way forward. I would say that emotion of not surprised when I hear announcements like this is a consistent one, where it's like, this is the bed he has made.
I kind of feel like talking about pragmatism is like the liberal version of conservatives talking about common sense values, where it's like, what does that mean, pragmatic? Like, you're saying that you are trying to enact policies that you think are effective. Like, yeah, that's every politician is making that claim. Everyone's saying, that these are pragmatic approaches towards policy. It's the pragmatic thing to do, in my opinion, is to pursue policies which are effective. And when you look at bike lanes and you look at the benefits of businesses and the benefits to people's health, you consider from a provincial perspective, even, if you want to reduce healthcare spending, your number one goal should be preventative maintenance of the human body. And you achieve that by encouraging an active lifestyle. And when you rip out bike lanes, you discourage people from making use of that active mobility and instead getting them in their cars, where then, they're more likely to suffer injury and death, as well as just, experience the inevitable consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. When it comes to, you look more into this from the community engagement side of things. Do you feel like the bike lanes had an effective community engagement process when they were initially enacted? And what do you think it represents for a politician to maybe not go along with that process and look to pull back that policy?
The question of bike lanes is often one that is discussed at City Hall. It's one that is, honestly, like, the motions of it are frequented, I would have to say, and to involve all community members in every single motion would be next to impossible. And so it's clear and obvious that a lot of these meetings and these consultations would fall through the cracks. And unless you are sitting at City Hall or during these meetings, somehow while also being at work, it's clear that a lot of community members wouldn't have their concerns or their opinions or their perspectives heard or understood as a result of that. Can you ever involve a community enough in a decision like that? I don't think that is possible, because these meetings are not necessarily accessible for the vast majority of people, especially if they work 9 to 5s. The main concern that we've been seeing from a lot of people, that obviously there are more deaths when there are no bike lanes, and to remove the bike lanes is a huge concern for people of that community or related to that community. And so I can imagine, and I have seen, that the reaction from the removal of the bike lanes has definitely polarized a lot of people when it comes to Brad Bradford's race and his campaigning.
I do worry that sometimes people talk about, well, I wasn't part of the community engagement, so therefore the community engagement wasn't effective. And as much as I think that community engagement is very important, and we spoke earlier about old Chinatown and it being razed in order to build a new city hall. We can look at the history of the mid 20th century of a lot of a lack of effective stakeholder engagement, leading to communities that didn't hold privilege to have a lot of their protected neighborhoods, decimated. And the stakeholder engagement, I think, was incorporated and created in many municipalities with this good-natured perspective in the hopes that it would help people who were more marginalized hold on to and get their voices heard. But it feels as though in the past couple of decades, the stakeholder engagement model has more been weaponized by those who have power, by those who have money, in order to prevent effective policies which would actually help those disadvantaged communities who aren't able to go to those community meetings. And that when you look at a lot of these community engagement meetings, the people who do show up are the wealthy. It's the people who have the time to go. And so, with something like bike lanes, especially when there's such a large capital element of, the biggest advertisers ever are going to be the car companies giving people the propaganda, telling them that the only way that they can get around is through, driving everywhere. That's one issue where we don't always need to listen to the community about their perspective on bike lanes, because a lot of people just aren't actually educated on what the pros and cons of bike lanes are, unfortunately. And so when, I would point towards a similar thing of like vaccination, right? Like when some of these issues are complex, like transportation planning, do we really need to rely on the person who has an unsophisticated understanding of these issues to give us their perspective? Or should we instead defer to the experts when they say, yes, bike lanes are important? Dan, do you think, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there. One is like, to a certain extent, yeah, there's evidence, there's expertise, and we live in an age currently where this form of populism exists kind of on the left and right, that expert opinion is kind of second to a form of community input that is quite intense. But on the other hand, that is a correction from a time where the community was not heard at all. And I think that there is something to be said for, I did a project a while back with Jay Pitter where we featured, I'm going to call them the unconventional cyclist, in that the conventional cyclist that you might imagine is, the Lycra wearing white guy, able-bodied downtown. And we went to more kind of far-flung suburban areas, and we spoke to people who might bike because they are delivering food or are in suburban conditions. And those voices are not being heard at community consultations either. And that would also change the game a fair way. I would also say that the individuals that we spoke to in those senses are not necessarily experts on bike lanes or road safety, but are experts on their lived perspective as cyclists in places that are far more hostile, arguably, to cyclists than downtown cyclists who, are already biking in places where there's at least limited infrastructure, or at least there's a concentration of cyclists that have drivers a little more aware of what's happening and aren't in overtly kind of high speed, high width, street conditions that are quite frankly frightening. I would find very difficult to bike myself when I have biked them. And so I think, there's a couple corrections. One is, maybe trust the experts a little more and we can move a little quicker on certain things. But also we need to, if we are going to do community consultations, we need to ensure that they are equitable consultations that take into account the full diversity of user experience and not just kind of the typical people who show up, because you have, just as much as you have the typical people who show up to oppose these things, you have the typical people to show up and support them. And no offense to bike activists, who I actually think are doing great work all over, but they do fit a certain demographic quite often, which is why the right dunks on them. And dunks, I mean, on me, I'm one of them. So I get it. And it's also why I think that the work of someone like David Shelnut, the biking lawyer, what he's doing with the safety training for delivery workers is really interesting, where they come to his training session on road safety and how to cycle as a good, fellow cyclist. And they get a free insulated bag, right? there's ways beyond just community consultation to make sure that things are inclusive and more open. And then he encourages them to participate in this process, this democratic process of making our streets safer, by doing that training. So I guess what I'm saying is I do agree with you to a certain extent, but I also think that we can't, forego community consultation altogether. There's a reason we brought it in, but it needs reforms in addition to just outright throwing out the whole thing.
I'm so tired of these. It's the wealthy people like Brad Bradford who ride around on their $5,000 bikes in their little racing groups who act as though they're somehow representative of the typical cyclist, and then they say that we need to rip out bike lanes. Well, dude, you're the ones going down like 50. You're going plus 50 miles per hour and like wherever the fuck at 8 o'clock, and you're the people who actually give cyclists a bad name. And then you go around saying, oh, well, when I'm driving downtown to get to my law firm in the morning, well, it would actually be really convenient if I didn't have all these bike lanes. Trust me, bro, I'm a cyclist because I'm a fucking wear my spandex on the evenings with the weekends. It's like, yeah, dude, you're not the one who matters. And it's like, and like, Dan, I see your point of, yes, look, obviously we're two white guys with like Warby Parker glasses talking about urban. Like it's a cliche. Like you look at
Bailey Nelson,
whatever. I'm Ollie Quinn. Look at Troy Pavlik in Edmonton. You look at Alex Williams. Like in every local media market, there's some white guy with glasses talking about how we need better urbanism. But like if you want to have like the white privileged conversation, like the drivers who are speeding down the streets, the ones who are saying we need to cut down speed cameras, like I'll go to toe with those people all day long on like some sort of privilege rubric. And it's so fucking infuriating. And gosh, like I don't want to speak about Stephanie behind her back, but like, you want to talk about pragmatism, don't support a mayoral candidate who's enacting policies which will lead to the death of vulnerable road users. And it makes me very difficult to take anything that a party says with a grain of salt. Look, she's not a speaker for the party, but like that's what's pragmatic. You want to talk about provincial policies that are helpful? Support policies which don't lead to cyclists dying. And if Brad Bradford becomes mayor, what's going to happen is more cyclists are going to die. And that's just a fact. Okay. You can look at this clearly. More cyclists are going to die because if Brad Bradford is elected mayor. Your comment on that.
Wow. Tough to follow. I can't lie. A couple things. My glasses are Bailey Nelson too. So that's number one.
Fake
number
fan,
two.
where are they? Name every type of glasses.
Exactly. Number two, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that honestly, like hot take.
I'm just going to clip that, by the way. More people will die if Brad Bradford's elected mayor. I totally agree. That's it. That's all it's going to make.
Imagine. And then I get fired. No, I'm kidding. That's funny. I do wholeheartedly agree though. And this might be a hot take for some people. Like as somebody that grew up in Mississauga, or Pickering or Ajax, bike lanes in comparison to Toronto's bike lanes are like nothing. There are so many routes on like in Mississauga specifically where I'm like genuinely my children are never allowed to learn how to ride a bicycle because this is so incredibly dangerous. And I think bike lanes in Toronto has like just observing them on a day-to-day basis has opened my eyes to the literal struggle and that so many bike users use in the city. And there's a really important thing that Dan was talking about when it comes to who is actually in the room when these community consultations happen. And because they are so inaccessible, and yes, a lot of them can happen after work hours, but because a lot of them do also happen once a month or every 2 weeks and it's usually during work hours, you'll find that the people that are in attendance are usually the people that are the most expressive and the most in love with the idea of cycling, and it doesn't really represent the average day-to-day user. And these people that are in these rooms are already equipped with a lot of the knowledge and safety precautions and routes necessary to get around the city safely. And I think kind of just echoing what was said already, community consultations are absolutely essential, but they do need to be diversified and they do need to be expanded in a way that actually represents and helps resonate with the actual integrity and the entirety of the city rather than just a select few that have the privilege and knowledge of what safe cycling even begins to look like. But I also think that you can't do that without the experts in the room as well.
Trying to figure out how much of this I'm going to have to cut.
I mean, I'm gonna jump off of that if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
Which is, like a thing that commonly happens. I don't want, maybe not commonly, but a thing that I've seen happen. And like, I think a lot of the trouble with community consultations to begin with, but also bike lanes, is like an ignored kind of facet is this idea of change management, that a community feels like something is being imposed on them without like a proper kind of educational component to it. And there is also now obviously the problem of like certain media or political forces kind of getting them all excited before anything has even happened. And so you're kind of counter programming at the same time. But I think, there needs to be like a really strong and healthy mutual respect, both from the experts towards the community, being ready to listen and learn and understand that the way that like, just because you saw something in Copenhagen or whatever, it's not going to necessarily work here. But also for the community to be like, these people did not become public servants because it is the best paying job in the world and they get so much freedom to do whatever they want to the city at any given time. Like, the job of a city staffer on these files is often pretty actually restricted and obviously subject eventually to council's vote and the various other whims of politicians. And so I think, an attitude from kind of both parties where the staff have set up a consultation that is fair and just and equitable, and then a public that comes to these things excited to collaborate with experts who do care and respect them, would be a really exciting thing to see. And I think that's achieved with some frequency. I don't know what that is exactly, but obviously not often enough, because some people do have this kind of growing resentment and feeling about public consultations, and certainly not in situations where that kind of base threshold of an equitable process has been set out from the get-go with no childcare provided or things only happening during the workday, et cetera, et cetera. But in the cases where we do get the community and experts kind of both on side, and there is enough freedom for them to, like, I hate to use the word innovate because it's such a buzzword, but innovate. The thing I was thinking about recently was I think it's called the Toronto barrier. Yeah, that's it. For bike lanes, these like
the Jersey barrier.
Yeah. So like the Toronto barrier, as it's called, it's like a low concrete curb that basically acts like a kind of like a I don't know, like a foot, 2 feet high, something. It's tiny, but the way that it's been implemented has been so successful that they're using it in other jurisdictions now, right? Like when we give experts a certain amount of room to create, and then we like pair that with the community's needs, there is the possibility of creating things that are both mutually beneficial, but also like can literally be exported. And I think that's a very exciting possibility. And I think we need to celebrate more often when our city staff, do something that is considered so good. Another thing that comes to mind, I know this is jumping to a different transportation topic, but like the bus network in Toronto, when the TTC wins awards, it's not because of the subway system, which is what it is, and the streetcar system, which is what it is, because downtowners complain about that all the time, and people who are focused on urbanism in Toronto are often downtown people. But the thing that like is celebrated about Toronto's transit system often is the suburban bus network, which is much more frequent and much more useful than the suburban bus networks in many major metropolitans in North America. And so like it's this idea of like making sure that we understand what is working well when we go into a consultation as well, so that we can compound those successes with the community's input and find out, these things that are going well, what could do better. But also every time we do a community consultation, it's not just going to be a big fight. There are actually possibilities where the city has done really well and could continue to improve with mutual cooperation and input.
Dan, you
I'm hope coded, bro. It's happening.
Yeah, I'm revolution coded increasingly. I kind of, you mentioned that things like transportation cut across parties, and I think increasingly I disagree with you, and I there is this mentality that like urbanism is somehow disconnected from the broader, political culture wars of the time. But when I view a politician like Brad Bradford talking about bike lanes and looking to remove them, birds of a feather, right? Like, if you look at the other prominent people talking about ripping out bike lanes right now, it's Donald Trump talking about DEI bike lanes and his reality TV show Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy wanting to remove them. And you look at Devin Dreeshen, former Trump staffer in Alberta, wanting to remove bike lanes as well. And then and why is that? It's because the people who are so passionate about driving are inherently antisocial. Right? It is a mentality of, I do not want to be around other people. I don't want to be on a train. I don't want to be on a bus. It is the way they talk about people who use transit, the way they talk about people who use active mobility. It is defined by an ego around their own access to capital, which they think means that they should get a superior transportation experience over anyone else. And so when I look at Brad Bradford, I think he's a closet conservative. And frankly, I think that the Ontario Liberals are closet conservatives too, if they're even embracing any of that sort of policy, because it is inherently classist. It is inherently antisocial to rely on a car-based transportation system. You say we can't beat Copenhagen. I say, why the fuck not? There is nothing stopping us from bringing in more buses everywhere. There's nothing stopping us from getting more cars off the road. Fine, you want to drive to your local subway? Let's do that. Let's build more, parking garages near subways around, right? Like, it doesn't have to be you drive, you replace the whole trip, but like, we need to get cars off the road desperately. Yesterday, we need to get cars off the road. And people talk about this as though like, oh, it's the environment. But fuck, if climate change wasn't a thing, if EVs were already around and they were sourced entirely by renewable energies at this point, I would still say you shouldn't fucking drive. And because it is inherently going to encourage you to look towards other people on the other side of that EV with an ego, which I think is inherently destructive to the social fabric of our society. There's a reason why the suburbs are moving further to the right. It's because people trap themselves in these little boxes on the hillside, and then they say anyone else's must be terrifying. It is a flaw baked in the design of these forms of transportation. And I think people need to wake up on every level of government and recognize that driving makes you conservative. It's not that conservatives drive, it's that driving makes you a little hateful of everyone around you. Aya, your comment on that?
No comment from me on that.
Good. And cut. And that's all going in the bin. Now let's talk about FIFA wrapping up. Wasn't that fun? Remember the World Cup? Wasn't that a lot of fun? Who won? Spain won, right, Dan? Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
Are we talking about FIFA for real? Because I have no idea what's going on with FIFA.
We're just talking. We're going to do a quick wrap up because this is something the Green Line had covered, and I did a piece on. Correct, right, Aya?
Yes, we did.
So, Aya, in your words, how do you think the FIFA festival, the FIFA whole experience went in Toronto? What do you think the mood of the city has been?
Oh my God. I love this topic. Thank you so much. I think that the entirety of... Okay, honestly, this is what I think. I think FIFA started off pretty strongly, okay? Yes. I think FIFA, the vibes were up. I think there was so much... Why are you laughing at me?
I'm just thinking I can't include like half the things that I just said. I'm just... Sorry, guys. I was very surprised that she said Brad Bradford, and I'm still just trying to deal with that.
Oh, from the beginning?
Because I know so many people. First off, I'm shocked because what happened? Like, I got in touch with their team, right? Because they reached out to me after, I think, because Sabrina Nanji of the Queen's Park Observer linked the panel, and they reached out to me. So I'm just trying to think like how much I can include that without pissing them off. And maybe I'm fine pissing them off. Anyways, I come across as too toxic. Anyways, FIFA, cut. FIFA, Aya, how do you think the FIFA World Cup went in Toronto?
Okay, there are a couple different ways that I want to go about this. I think infrastructure wise, I think a lot of people online and on social media were pleasantly surprised at the way that the city cleaned up. I think a lot of people were also slightly pissed off at how fast the city cleaned up. All the potholes that were filled, all of the transit. I personally benefited from the fact that there was an increase in just the GO trains just alone. Like that's not outside of Toronto technically. So from that end, I think a lot of people benefited from the way that Toronto essentially had to present itself for all of the visitors and all the people that were coming to see all the games and enjoy. On the other hand, I think FIFA was a really, really awesome opportunity for people within Toronto, outside of Toronto, and even outside of Canada to connect with one another. So my background is Iraqi, and as you folks might know, Iraq was part of the World Cup for the first time in, I think, 40 years. And if you had the pleasure of being downtown, for the day of Iraq versus Senegal, you'll see that it was one of the biggest rallies FIFA had seen in Toronto. There was a journalist that was there, I don't remember from what outlet, but they said that this was top 3. And this was prior to us actually going out onto the street outside of the park. Because when I tell you, once you went out, it was thousands and thousands and thousands more. And I think a lot of people had finally the opportunity to see different like nationalities and different ethnic groups and different people, different religions, in a way that they hadn't been exposed to prior. So when it comes to that, I think FIFA was a really, really awesome opportunity for people to learn about other people, but it was also an awesome opportunity for people like me, at least, to connect with my roots. And I often say, well, since it happened, that it was probably the day of the Iraq game and the day before was probably top 10 moments of my entire life, because it was such a beautiful way to connect with people. Even Julia Lawrence, the LJI reporter at the Green Line, I took her with me to the actual Iraq march, but we also had the opportunity to go about prior to that and kind of just interview people that were repping their countries. And we got to know a lot of people that weren't actually from Toronto, that made their shirts, that made their skirts, that were wearing like cool shoes, and they had stories. And it was a really awesome opportunity for people to say that my country has gone through so much, but like we're here and we're so proud. So from that end, I think FIFA was really, really wonderful. I think seeing things at Stack Market, seeing things at the FIFA Fan Fest, seeing things at even Union Station, and just kind of walking about, and like all of the even rendezvous, like I think seeing the way that people kind of locked in and honestly had the summer of their lives was an opportunity that I don't think, like, I feel bad for the people that missed out, essentially. And it was a really, really awesome opportunity for us at the Green Line, too, because it allowed us to kind of like venture into kind of breaking-ish news, which isn't really typical for the Green Line because, you know, things were happening then and there. But it was also a really, really fun way to get to know people. And we did a couple different things, from where to watch FIFA games to FIFA fan outfits to kind of just like, what does this mean for you and your country? But I will say that people started like slowly getting bored and sick as their country started getting eliminated. FIFA Fan Fest specifically, because we had media passes. In the beginning, it was lively. It was kind of hard to go around because it was so packed. But towards the end, towards like the semifinals and the finals, there were a lot less people that were there.
Yeah, Dan, did you take in any of the revelry whatsoever?
Yeah, I'll say 2 things. One is like in my street photography hat, it was electric, like seeing people out enjoying it, being in parts of the city and hearing people, you know, speaking all sorts of different languages and asking for, I helped so many different people with directions. Like I've got that affable urbanist face, I guess, of just like, this guy can point me in the right direction, and use Google Translate. I had a lot of fun with that. I would say the one thing for me was actually kind of before FIFA really started, was I attended the Toronto Unhoused Union, Homeless and Unhoused Union's Red Card protest, which was based around a report that they put out, some of their membership, around increased violent enforcement around Union Station, basically clearing out populations in anticipation of the games, and that there's kind of a track record of this happening in various cities, that when you have a big sports event, sometimes visible homelessness, visible drug use, whatever, gets moved around in rough ways, to say the least. And so that protest was, I thought, really interesting and powerful, because it was put on by members of this union who themselves are unhoused, who themselves may have been subject to violence, who may have been represented in the report that was put out. But as serious as the subject matter was, people dressed up in referee outfits. They brought along red cards. They marched, danced, sung from Berksey Park down to Union Station, where they, staged a little protest, in the shadow of the CN Tower, in the shadow of Union Station. I took a photo of one of the reports being handed to one of the security guards, and him trying to surreptitiously read it behind the columns of Union Station. You have permission to use that photo in the visuals if you get there. But point is, I thought it was a really powerful protest, that there's this really joyous event that, it is certainly the people's game, and the people love that game, but FIFA itself as an organization, it's worth interrogating who they're for. And I think that is something that, we see when it comes to the impact these games have on cities long-term, on populations long-term, and what their leadership is doing with the money and power that they have. So I think, like I said, incredible for the population by large, but certainly taking a look at some of those impacts where they happened was also something I noticed.
Yeah, Gianni Infantino, which I believe directly translates to Johnny Baby, has got some criticism in the past a little bit about his idea to privatize FIFA even more. And I think that's kind of a concern, where the real credit of FIFA and the Fan Fest was that it was beyond even the games. It's a celebration of the city, and I think a celebration of the community in the city. And the snake rots from its head when you see this organization, which is increasingly defined by corruption, increasingly in bed and interested in pleasing leaders with fascist inclinations. You worry about how that then affects every government that then needs to cooperate with this in the future. I sure it won't be anytime soon that Toronto has the FIFA World Cup again. These things don't come around very often, but I think it is just that brings up that consistent conversation of how does a city like Toronto deal with these higher organizational levels in an effective way to get that economic benefit, if it is there, without compromising on their values. I think that's a good place to wrap up today. My adrenaline is pumping a little bit, and I need to figure out how to effectively edit this. And I've taken enough of both of your times today. Where can people find you online?
You can find The Green Line at thegreenline.to for our domain, and at TGL Helps on Instagram, The Green Line on TikTok. You can find me, if you want to email me, Aya at thegreenline.to. Not the usual spelling of Aya, it's AIA. And then at Aya, journalist Aya on Instagram.
And Dan.
I am Another Glass Box, basically everywhere, on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter. And that's my website too, anotherglassbox.com. And that's it. I'm also working on a project called the Coalition for Responsible Community Development, which will be kind of going more live than it's been in the next couple of days. So that's exciting. And
yeah, if you enjoyed some of the conversations around community engagement, definitely check in with the episode that Dan Seljak did with Cheryl Case, who's also at the Coalition of Responsible Community Development. That was a great chat. And didn't include any Chris throwing a tantrum, so that was a benefit as well.
No, that's a detriment. We need Chris throwing tantrums. It's really important.
All right. Thank you both so much. Have a great evening. Yeah, Chris from the more recent past now. Here are my concerns with... I basically didn't edit out anything that I said. In the middle of that conversation, I thought I was going to end up putting out an episode of a version of that episode that didn't include me saying things like driving makes you more conservative, or a vote for Brad Bradford is a vote for, cyclist death. But that's what I believe. I do believe you shouldn't drive. And I'm sorry if you're a part of the portion of the audience that does drive. I hope you're a driver who has to drive because of the poor planning that has led to you being car dependent. But I hope that you are also someone who's looking for the city to invest in changes and doesn't stubbornly hold on to a form of transportation which is making many people's lives worse, including your own. And I think it's unfortunate that politicians like Stephanie Smyth and Brad Bradford and Doug Ford and Donald Trump continue to embrace a car-based transportation system because the people who have money like to drive their fancy cars. I hope you enjoyed the last time that a member of the OLP caucus was willing to speak with me. Unless, hey, if you're an MPP for the Ontario Liberals and you think that active transportation is actually a good thing because you trust science and you think that, cyclists shouldn't be hit by cars, I'd love to chat with you and come on the show, because I bet that Stephanie Smyth doesn't actually speak for the whole of the party. But also, I think I'm going to prioritize getting an NDP voice on the show pretty soon. I have been in touch to get the interim leader of the OLP, John Fraser, on the show. I don't know if that's still going to be able to happen. But yeah. If you have any questions or comments, please send an email to torontothepoliticsshow@gmail.com. I think I am going to do a bit of a mailbag episode soon because that seems to be in vogue nowadays. So if you have any questions, please send it to torontothepoliticsshow@gmail.com. You can find the show on Instagram at torontothepoliticsshow. We have recently launched a donation link if you would like to send us some money, because Lord knows that I will never take any advertising dollars from a car company. Can you imagine if you're listening to this and just cuts in and it's like, Lexus? That's the issue with dynamic ads and why I'm concerned about ever opening this up for advertisers, because then you have issues like that, or even gambling ads. And that's why I would like to rely on donations and then essentially, eventually memberships as well. I think I am going to end up launching a Patreon of some sort, which will include more of me discussing the behind the curtain perspective of what it's like to make these shows. Because I need money to operate this. There are just small things. I was having a conversation with some folks that I wanted to book today about doing the show in person versus live. And I had explained to them, my mixer, I can only have 2 mics in it. I do have my eyes on another mixer right now, which would cost $300, and I'd buy another mic, and that all together would be $450. So if you like more in-person conversations, donate some money to buymeacoffee.com/TTPTS. That link is in the description. Yeah. Take care of each other. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. My name is Chris Chesson. I'm the only person who makes this. That's been a nice thing. Sometimes now when politicians reach out to me, they say, hey, Chris, or whatever team member handles the email, it's just me. It's just me. I promise you, if there was another team member that worked on this with me, they would probably, discourage me from posting as often as I do about some issues. Also, apologies for my absolutely dirty mustache right now. Disgusting, if you ask me. All right, bye-bye.